So either you will really hate this movie or you'd want to watch it twice. Let me explain. So The Power of the Dog is a 2021 Western drama film written by Jane Campion. Now, Jane Campion really is a pioneer when it comes to a woman director. She's won a lot of awards as well. Now, Jane Campion, I think, has done a brilliant job here. She is a celebrated New Zealand director. When I watched this movie, that's the feeling I got, that this feels like a really detailed book. And whenever a movie feels like a book, and it is from a book, that's always a good sign. I certainly feel like I'd want to watch it again because I don't think I caught everything. Well, if I were to give my review of it, I would definitely say that this is not a movie for everyone. If you're coming in expecting a really flashy movie or even a lot of events with gunfights, etc., that's not what you're going to find here. If you want a movie that makes you think, if you want a movie that is brilliant in its characterization, if you want to see performances with multiple layers, a movie that takes its audience as intelligent human beings and wants you to see the hidden subtle things or watch it with that kind of eye, you will find it rather enjoyable. So this would be my verdict, is that it's definitely a 4 out of 5 for me, but it's an interesting movie in the sense it's a movie that made me think a lot after the movie, and now the more I think about it, the more I tend to appreciate the movie. Now, talking about the themes in this movie, I think the characters really exemplified the themes that the director was trying to put across, and of course it must have been there in the original book by Thomas Savage as well. So let me quickly run through some of the themes I noticed that were beautifully placed in if you're looking for it. Number one is the question of masculinity, right? What is masculinity? Perhaps quote unquote toxic masculinity, aggressive masculinity exemplified by Phil's character, who is cruel, who is rough, who really shows hatred towards anything softer or anything even feminine. So he works with his hands, physical strength. You clearly see that in Phil. And then on the other hand, you see a different kind of strength from his brother, who is a lot more diplomatic, right? And you see his strength is being social with people, right? He can rub shoulders with people who make decisions, the governors, the mayors. And so his social skill is his strength. A strength that is very different from possibly both of these is exemplified by Peter. And that is again brilliantly shown by the actor, right? In the most subtle ways. He shows you glimpses of that kind of strength, which Phil couldn't possibly understand. And his strength, or Peter's strength, is the strength of a man that thinks a lot, that calculates, a thinking man's strength in many ways, which is not brute force, but it is planning, it is thinking things through, doing things in a smart way to remove obstacles. A second theme that we can talk about is loneliness, and you can see loneliness in Phil's life, from having lost his partner, his mentor, possibly his lover, Bronco, in the past, and how he's reeling from that loss. And so at present, he's extremely lonely. And how does he deal with that loneliness? Once again, he takes it out on other people in a negative way. And of course, he possibly finds meaning in the work he does as a ranch owner. And he really, throws himself to that. You see loneliness from Rose, who's dealing with possibly a broken marriage or a husband who suicided, and maybe even a loss of her identity or the skills that she had as a musician in the past. And today she's doing something that is just making ends meet. But she deals with it again with alcohol. If she comes across something that makes her anxious, you can see her turn towards alcohol. Even in George, who oftentimes he has his brother, but you see there is something missing in him. And at one point he even sheds a few tears because he's so happy that he found Rose. So he deals with loneliness by allowing himself to open up to find love. Another theme is building broken relationships. And you can see Phil, again, starting with Phil, although he probably felt he cannot rebuild relationship. He can only hold on to the past memories that he has with his lover and mentor and all of that. But then towards the very end, you can see he's allowing himself to open up to Peter. There's that theme of mending broken relationships. Of course, Rose, having lost a husband, now finds a new lover in a new husband even. That I find interesting. There's a theme of kindness as well. The question of, what does it mean to be kind? And at times, can you kill or remove an obstacle, even if it's a person, for the sake of saving someone you love? And Peter definitely does that. He removes the tormentor or the dog that hounds his mother. That is an act of kindness towards his mother, right? You also see Peter as a surgeon. He wants to be a doctor and a surgeon, so you do still need to be cold enough to be able to rip apart bodies and look at organs and handle blood, but at the same time you do that in order to save lives. You do that to learn so that you can save lives in the future. And there are several pretty brilliant symbols in the movie that lends itself to character development, that lends itself to the overarching themes that the movie is trying to juggle together, right? So one of the symbols that you can see is gloves, and the lack of gloves. So protection versus no protection, right? Protection can be from toxic relationships, from things that can harm you or hurt you. And you see that gloves repeatedly here and there with certain characters. Ultimately, what led to the demise of Phil is not wearing gloves. He has an open wound and he's trying to continue working with that open wound. Whereas you see Peter often use gloves when he's handling things, right? You also see Rose get a pair of gloves that she wears right before she faints. And then she refuses to take it off. You can kind of see that as protection. She, wears that and falls asleep. So I think that's a brilliant use of a symbol. Another symbol I noticed is shadows. What is hidden and what comes to light. There's multiple themes around that. At one point you can see Phil in some ways challenging Peter to look at just out there, all these mountains. What do you notice? And Phil is able to notice, or rather Peter is able to notice, there's a barking dog, right, in the shadows that's formed. Talking about hidden, a lot of these characters, especially Phil, he has something to hide, namely his sexuality. But he's always trying to expose or bring to light other people's secrets in some ways, right? He's trying to expose his brother for having that relationship with Rose. He says that basically he's going to write to their mother and let them know that they've run off or something like that. But George deals with it differently by bringing it to light. He says, I married her. Another thing is he tries to expose Rose's secret alcoholism, right? Her drinking problem. And befriending Peter later on and trying to be nice to him and build this new relationship is also another form of hiding, right? He wants his secret to be hidden. So the only person that knows his secret about his identity as a gay man perhaps, he wants to keep him as a friend lest Peter goes and exposes him. Again, spoiler alert, but you see that Peter ultimately deceives Phil by pretending to be, okay, I want to be like you, I want to come under your wings, and I want you to be my mentor, I look up to you, etc., and makes him vulnerable, just like the open wound. And finally here is Phil opening himself up to a new kind of relationship, which at the end of the day, Peter makes sure that he gives Phil a raw hide that is of a deceased animal with anthrax possibly, right? And he does that on purpose so that Phil is able to touch it and ultimately die from it. So when everyone else was able to see a man who is a bully, who is scary, who is cruel, another symbol that is used is the piano. Now, the piano and Rose. The piano is a source of torture and torment to Rose again because one, it makes a lot of noise in her restaurant and she kind of regrets even buying it because you have drunk people making noise on that a lot. The second thing is she goes into her new home and her new husband buys a grand piano and expects her to play beautiful music for his guests. Now, it seems like she was some kind of a musician or had even a successful career in the past, but of course it looks like she's no longer doing that. It looks like she's just a widow trying to support her child by sort of running this small restaurant. So it's a reminder of her past, it's a reminder of what she could have been, but she can no longer reach that right now. So the other thing is with the paper rose that Peter makes, and then we find out that his mother's name is Rose as well, and I think that's a powerful imagery that's used there. And of course Phil is the one to make fun of that paper rose, whereas Peter is pretty proud of it. He comes forth and he says, "I made it." Although, you know, the reaction from Phil is to mock it and eventually even destroy it. And I think that's a pretty interesting way to set the dynamic between these three characters, that is Rose, Peter, and Phil. The last imagery that I tend to notice is how strands, a rope is made out of strands. A rope looks like it's really strong, etc., but at the end of the day, it is made out of a whole bunch of strands. So this imagery of strands, this imagery of things that are rather fragile or delicate, yet there's a different kind of strength to them, and that is associated often with Peter. Peter has this comb and he plays around with the teeth of the comb often, right? You see that image at the beginning of the movie, towards the end as well. Phil, on the other hand, a rope is always associated with Phil. It can mean a bunch of things, but you can see how he's constantly taking things that seem delicate and forming them into the strong, tight, tough rope. So I think that's a brilliant symbol that's used throughout the movie. Now, these are my thoughts on the symbols, some of the character, and the themes that they bring out. If you like movie analysis like this, please consider subscribing to my channel and leave a thumbs up if you want to see more videos like these.